go to my guests. We are joined with the one, the only Mark Sleboda. Mark Sleboda is an international relations and security analyst. My man, how you doing, Mark? You doing okay this morning or today for you?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I'm alive. It is early, but I am here nonetheless. I had to bring you on to have a conversation about what Trump is saying, at the very least to the New York Post, is that he's been in conversations with Putin about Ukraine. And what I'm hearing about these conversations, they're talking about meeting at one point. But on top of meeting, there seems to be this kind of carrot and stick approach that Trump seems to be going with behind the scenes of maximal sanctions if you don't fall in line. But if you do fall in line, we'll allow the sanctions to go away. We'll allow the Nord Stream to come back on. We'll allow ponies and unicorns and rainbows to fly out of the sky and grace the Russian soil. Basically, they're offering all of these promises as a carrot and infinite sanctions as a stick, even against countries like China and India that work with Russia, or for that matter, the BRICS countries. What is going on here? Russia's being kind of sheepish about this. They don't want to call Trump a liar, so they don't necessarily come out and say, well, no, these conversations haven't taken place. By the same token, they haven't necessarily said that they have either. They're being somewhat, squirrely with it. Peskov comes out and says there are back channel communications or communications that are taking place on multiple levels. But Trump is being very specific, saying he spoke with Putin. What is going on here? What's the conversation that's taking place in real terms?
Okay, so first of all, the statement that Trump has said definitively that he has spoken from Putin, we have not actually heard from Trump. This was from a very sparsely and poorly written blurb of an article in the New York Post. Not exactly something that I would consider a paper of record. Now, obviously, Donald Trump feels more comfortable with the New York Post, and it does seem that they had an exclusive interview with him on Air Force One. By the content of that article, that conversation must have lasted less than 5 minutes. Because there is not very little substance there. And we don't actually have a quote from Trump. We have the New York Times, the New York Post author saying that Trump said he spoke to Putin. What we actually have Trump recorded as saying is, if I'm speaking to him, I'm not going to say. So, meanwhile, the Russian side continues to say as you said, they're not outright saying Trump is a liar. We haven't spoken in those words, but we had a Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov reiterate again today that there has been no contacts at the highest level, and there is no contacts at the highest level scheduled between Russia and the United States, which leaves us in a he said, she said. Do you want to believe Trump, or do you want to believe the Russian government? Whether contacts have taken place. The Russian statements, to my mind, seem to indicate that some contacts have been restored at the lower level, right? At the embassy level. Right? Maybe at the intelligence services level, they are talking to each other. But the Russian side is giving no indication, no firm. In fact, they're giving fairly firm indications that there has been no conversations between Trump and Putin. Right? As firm as we can get without the Russian presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, spoke over the weekend, and he basically said, if such conversations are happening, I don't know anything about it. And he was being pretty blunt. I mean, the way he said it was fairly sincere and convincing. And
right.
What gave the impression that he did not believe that they were happening, right? So maybe there's some secret phone conversations going on between Trump and Putin that the Russian presidential spokesman, that the top ranks of Russia's diplomats are not aware of. Or it could be Trump talking out of his butt again, exaggerating things and being purposefully vague in a way that is, well, not very Trump, I have to say.
Yeah.
Trump
Yeah.
usually comes right out and saying it. And when he's saying, I'm not going to say, and I'm not going to say how many times we've spoken, and I better not say, and these other things. Now, it would be one thing if they had spoken before the inauguration and there had been an agreement to not disclose that for political reasons in the U.S. It would be a further understanding if they had spoken after the inauguration, but Trump didn't want it publicly taking center stage in the United States in the press while he was still trying to get his own secretaries and appointments through the Senate, right? Through the appointment process. And if it was the United States firmly, not talking about it, not denying it. But this is not the situation. This is Trump being coy and suggesting that they have spoken, the exact opposite of that situation, while the Russians are like, oh, what? No, not really. But we're ready to talk if you want to. So that leaves us with two possibilities. One, they are secretly having conversations. They agreed to keep it quiet. And then Trump immediately went out and blabbed to the press about it. And the Russians are like, wait a minute, didn't we just agree not to talk about this? Right? That's one possibility. The other possibility is Trump is talking out of his butt.
Yeah.
And Occam's razor being what it is, both are, shall we say, theoretically possible, right? Either one could be true, but I tend to believe the latter, that this is just Trump bloviating without any real substance more than the former. This is all I have, what evidence I have to go on, right? I know there is a lot of wild stuff going on out there right now. There are a lot of people on social media saying a lot of things that, as far as I'm concerned, some of them I saw a video of a deep fake video of Trump speaking just today, claiming, having Trump say things like, I'll make part of Russia. I'll have parts of Russia included in the Ukrainian constitution and that sorts of things, right? And then also saying words like bullshit out loud to a room full of press. And as Trump does a lot of things, but openly swearing to a room full of press is not one of them. So obviously this was disinformation. It is a deep fake video. It's fairly convincing if you don't, aren't paying attention. And I know that some Russian channels are promoting that around as if it happened. That threat, as far as I know, has not happened. I believe that is a not real. We have other people claiming that they have sources that I have not been able to confirm anywhere else, right? Ideas of total economic war and being threatened, with this carrot and stick approach. That is possible. But if so, I can't find anyone who's talking about it.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So here's what we do know. That scenario is plausible. It is very plausible because that is all that we have heard, right, on the subject so far. We have had multiple times Trump suggest that more sanctions, meaning he could level more sanctions about Russia. Mm-hmm. We have had Trump's envoy, Kellogg, former General Kellogg, outright say that he ranks current U.S. sanctions against Russia as only at a 3 out of 10. and that there's lots of room to ramp them up. Okay. And I mean, I don't actually believe that's true in the slightest, but that is what he has said, obviously making the suggestion that they have that they are preparing or they are considering launching more sanctions against Russia, right? And we have had reports in the press that both Kellogg and Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, in internal debates, this has been reported in the Western press, in internal debates are in favor of a escalate to de-escalate situation with Russia, meaning sanctions and providing more weapons to the Kiev regime. That's what we know for certain thus far. Thus, some of the things that we have heard unconfirmed by some people, and I don't want to name names or anything like that, are entirely plausible, but we don't know. We don't know that they've actually spoken yet. We have no confirmation of anything. We know that the flow of arms is continuing. We know that it has not been interrupted, as has previously been suggested and reported by some people. Whatever is happening to U.S. aid, right? That's another story. That is, financing for NGOs and medias and that sort of thing. And that obviously is having an effect, but it's not actually being done specifically against Ukraine, although that's certainly to the benefit here, right? The so-called independent U.S. funded propaganda out in the world, in Ukraine, in Russia, but also in Georgia, and against China and against Iran, all over the world, is suddenly without a paycheck and folding. I've seen numbers, 6,200 journalists and 700 some media outlets, right, are suddenly media outlets, propaganda, U.S. government propaganda, unfunded around the world. And there has been the suggestion by people close to the Trump administration that this could be extended to Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty as well. Now, It's not because Trump is against what USAID has done in terms of influence, all right, of we want to call it sharp power, of psychological info warfare operations against, well, to be fair, not only other countries, but their own people as well, because they hear the propaganda just as much, right? Because Trump has previously, in his previous administration, used them, right? I mean, he fully engaged USAID in his very ham-fisted attempt to overthrow the Venezuelan government during his last administration, and it was openly reported in the Western press that he has begun a covert influence war against China, right? Again, U.S. aid, not the only, right? And it has to be said, just because U.S. aid is defunded, at least suspended, right, for the time being, the National NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, is not touched, right? It may be also interrupted as part of Mark Rubio's stop work order, but there hasn't obviously been the mass purging of it like there has been USAID. Trump is focusing on USAID in particular because he has identified it as, in his mind, a viper's nest of his domestic political opponents. Samantha Powers being one of those raving lunatics that he is talking about. And on that one, I would probably actually agree with Trump on, right? And a lot of other people in USA. But it is not because they are acting as regime change, tools of the United States, or it's not because they're running pro-US propaganda networks. It's because they are critics and opponents of Donald Trump, and he's rooting out that rat's nest. And Maria Zakharova, the Russian foreign ministry spokesman, was quite clear about that today, saying, yes, it appears that Trump is purging out these foreign propaganda at its behest and its own internal bureaucracy to that effect, but only so that he can reformat it and direct it to his own purposes. Let's be clear about this. Do not think that Trump suddenly says that, oh, U.S. having InfoWar, PSYOP, however you want to term it, regime change efforts in other countries is bad. That's not what he is saying. That is not what is happening. He's going after his domestic political opponents. They just happens to be a lot of them in U.S. aid and a few other places within the government right now. This is part of his war, as he identifies it, as Steve Bannon identifies it, against the deep state, right? But just don't fall into the projectionist trap that thinking that whatever Trump will replace that with is good or better. It will just
they
be
kept
a
it.
different flavor of empire.
From my understanding, they put it under Rubio. And Rubio kind of made this point, like
one of the top neocons in the entire United States, like the young playboy of neocons.
Let me ask you this: say for the moment, though, that the reporting is correct, that a carrot and stick is being offered on some level,
entirely plausible.
And what I mean by that is for all intents and purposes the position that Donald Trump is taking on it, that he wants to freeze the conflict and everything else. That was reporting on it.
Yeah.
With sanctions, these kind of radical sanctions, I mean, does Russia just consider this a bluff? Do they, from their point of view, believe, okay, well, the most of these sanctions have already been issued? And for that matter, does Russia just disbelieve the promises that are coming out of America in regards to what they'll do in order to get a deal? Like, I don't know if there's been reporting internally in Moscow about the thinking behind the scenes. That's what I'm asking you about it. What's the thinking so far in Moscow?
Okay, so I mean, the thinking in the Kremlin is quite obviously they're not afraid of U.S. sanctions. They've already weathered over 24,000 sanctions against Russia, right? In the last decade, 24,000, right? They're not afraid of any more. There is very little direct exposure between the U.S. and the Russian economy. What there is, like say on uranium, that's what the United States buys from Russia in significant quantities, is simply because the U.S. needs it, right? That's the situation. They're not afraid. They're not going to be threatened, right? What if there was going to be, as you propose, as some people have reported, an all-out economic war on Russia? Let's be clear about what that is. That would be a war declared against the rest of the world, against all of the companies and countries that currently trade with Russia out there, to stop trading with Russia entirely, or face the wrath, or actively be sanctioned by the United States itself. And we're talking about extremely geopolitically crux and important countries like India, like Turkey, like the United Arab Emirates, like China. Indonesia, China. I mean, well, China is okay. We can already put that into the adversarial to the U.S. position, right? That is at least it sanctioning China in any way is problematic because China is so huge and their economy is so huge. In a similar way, Russia is problematic in that regard, in particular because it's the largest commodity supplier, right? The commodities that every country needs and that have become already a vital component part of the global economy, such as the threat of trying to force every other country in the world to stop using them would have such a disruptive effect on the market. You think you know what inflation is? Forget the rest of the world, which would be, just as, if not more infected. But let's simply talk to the American people. Do you think you know what inflation is? No. You don't know what inflation would be if there was an attempt to try to force every country in the world to stop buying grain from Russia, the largest exporter of grain to the world, to stop buying Russian oil and gas, the biggest energy in total energy exporter to the world, metals, right? Chemicals, all of these other things that Russia provides to the global economy. They do exist in other parts of the world, but they do not exist if in the quantities required to satisfy all of the world's demands, right? That's already, Russia's supply is already well included within the market, the market margins. We're talking up to 35%, right? You try to take that out of any market and the prices will immediately go sky high, right? And India's not going to like it. India just signed a 10-year long-term oil supply agreement with Russia, right? Big one, right? China continues to cement further oil and gas deals as well. And, you know, some of the large portions of the most at-risk portions of the world for food insecurity, including Africa, depend on Russian grain. Try to sanction Russian, you know, economy in its entirety. You can only do that by tanking the entire world's economy and thus gaining the diplomatic ire of the entire rest of the world on two accounts. One, because they don't like being told by the US who they can or cannot trade with. That would be sacrificing their sovereignty, their economic and political sovereignty to the United States. But also you would be immiserating their own people in the process because of the inflation and the lack of resources that would result. So if that is a threat that is on the table, right? Russia can be like, you want to take the whole world down in an attempt to take us down? All right, let's play. We're willing to risk that, whether it's a bluff or not. We'll see how long you last versus you know, how long we last in that regard.
Interesting.
Russia is a continental size economy, right? Most of what Russia vitally needs, right? You know, food, energy, metals, everything Russia produces of its own. In the last decade, it's with the help of Western sanctions, a lot of its domestic industries that withered after the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union, you know, textile production, automobile production, right? These other, they have all recovered, right? Because there was a lack of Western supply of these things, right? So the demand increased, you know, part of it was met by other countries, but the greatest part of it was filled by Russian domestic producers, which means you've seen a boom in the Russian agricultural industry, a boom in the Russian manufacturing industry, a boom across the board in these things. Russia is fairly economically self-sufficient. Are they going to be able to get imported Parmesan in those situations? No, right? You know, prosciutto. No, I mean, there's certain things, although to be perfectly honest, Russia does now make its own Parmesan.
Do they?
You know, well, I wouldn't rate it, you know, with Michelin stars, but if I'm grading it to put on my spaghetti, it works just fine. I hate to tell you. You know,
That's too
if
funny.
you're not, you know, ridiculously pretentious in those regards. Russia's not afraid. The Russian economy in the last 3 years has weathered everything that the entirety of the West has thrown at it, and in many ways only grown stronger. Look at Russia's growth numbers again. Yes, they have moderately high inflation, but a part of that is only because Russia's own average salaries are increasing so much. There's so much of a direct investment boom. Previously, a lot of Russian wealthy people, right, were taking their money that they made in Russia and investing it in other parts of the world, right? Now they can't do that because it's not safe for them, right? So they're reinvesting everything they make into the Russian economy, and they're reaping dividends and safety by doing it. And there is a lot of countries out there whose wealthy people, right? India, China, but also Saudi Arabia, Turkey, others, they have seen a market open up where the West has completely pulled itself out of, and they're investing and taking over niche parts of the Russian market. So Russia's not afraid of Western threats. It's really not. And if they want to try to take on the entire world to force them to stop trading with Russia, Russia's ready to go there. I mean, Trump, by threatening the ethnic cleansing of Palestine openly, right, talking about creating a French Riviera once we get all the pesky people who live there out of the situation, he has just inflamed the entire Islamic world against the United States to a degree that, frankly, I don't believe that he can understand. I don't think that he is capable of understanding that. It's just outside of his little reality bubble.
Step into